And at one point, she says to me, this isn't my first rodeo. And I said, yeah, well, it's mine. So I'm like, this is my first time with all of this. And here's what we're doing with Elysia. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. Welcome back to another episode of Jaywalking. I'm Jay. I'm your host. We're going to be talking about the usual, life unfiltered. As a matter of fact, right before we got rolling, I got a text as I was silencing my cell phone from my wife, and she said, hey, Katie said that Elysia said she ordered God costumes and that they're coming today. Please check your credit card. I'm like, what is going on right now? So my beautifully autistic daughter has apparently ordered God costumes on Amazon somehow. She probably got on my mom's phone, so I probably have to check my mom's credit card too. But that's what I'm dealing with right now. So I'm trying to also check my Amazon account while we get started here. So far, we're safe. She actually once ordered on Comcast when she was like, 2 years old. She ordered the entire series of Star Wars, like even the first 3 episodes, and like started them for like a nanosecond and then never watched any of them. And so she ordered it in like a nanosecond. It took me like 3 hours on the phone with Xfinity to get them to undo what a 2-year-old did in a second. So I was like, got to keep your eye out on her, which is actually perfect segue for us because actually we're looking at Autism Awareness Month. I don't know if you know this, but this week on Wednesday is Autism Awareness Day, and then that's neurodivergence. And that's something that I had no idea what that meant. I think a lot of us, if you were born in the 80s or before, it was a topic that, really wasn't explored at all, and we didn't really understand it. And I think a lot of times any kind of neurodivergence just got thrown into the same pot. We think about early special education, we probably all had, and I went to Catholic school, so like we didn't have a special education department. We just had, Carl sat over there, you know what I mean? So it was just, you just understood things were different. But now it's like a whole new ballgame because my wife's actually a special ed teacher. But yeah, today I want to talk a little bit about that. I mean, like, I did not, when you become a parent, you just assume, or you have the best hopes for how things are going to go. And then you don't realize when mile markers and things don't happen. You're like, what's going on? What's up? And I think, when I think about what we were going through, we were just seeing this beautiful, healthy baby in terms of all of her vital signs and all of this. But around the age when things start happening, like talking and babbling and walking and potty training, like those things just did not happen at a normal pace. And that was something that I can remember her sitting in the living room watching her favorite show, which at the time was the Chica Show. This was pre-Miss Rachel. And I'd yell her name and she'd be like, from me to the camera away, and I'm just yelling her name, and she didn't even flinch. And then the minute she was in another room and the Chica song's first note, like I used to watch this show with my grandma when she'd babysit me called Name That Tune, and they'd be like, I can name that tune in 2 notes. I mean, this was like half a note. Elysia would hear it from like 3 rooms over and come running. I'm like, how on earth is this girl hearing that and flocking? I'm screaming her name from the couch, nothing. And it was like, that was the first time I didn't really realize how she can set her focal attention to something and really tune other things out. And there are certain things she couldn't. It was like, if I was watching something and paused it for a second, because like Amanda called me from the kitchen, if you paused the video, she would drop to the floor and like duck and cover. Like it was just the oddest thing. If you paused it, she just couldn't deal. And even now, she yelled at me the other morning because I was taking too long to pick the channel. And for her, she needed that sound to continue at a rate she thought. Otherwise, like inside her whole system gets thrown off. Like I thought about that because we all have something like that. My daughter was playing with the dog the other day and the dog was bothering her. She was kind of being crabby that the dog was bothering her. I'm trying to do some work over on the couch. And I'm just like, feel the rage building inside me for the 2 of them going off. And so that's what happens to her, but it happens over sometimes things that we wouldn't notice. It's like the dog whistle effect. Like, I don't hear it. I can't feel it. We had one time, this was crazy. We would go to this diner. And I don't know if it's open anymore, but it was on High Street in Pottstown. And it was called Pots and Pans. I think it had a bunch of different owners. But we went in this one time. Elysia crosses the threshold. Now, she must be like 3 or something, or 2. Crosses the threshold of the door and just changes into a different person. She got in the booth and just hid under the table for the entire meal. Wouldn't get up. And she was nonverbal at that point, so we couldn't just be like, hey, what's wrong? She's not going to be like, well, Father, let me tell you what is bothering me. Like, that wasn't something in her ability. We were just like, okay, yeah, Alicia's going to eat her chicken fingers from under the table today, and that's how that's going to go. And so I'm like, what happened when we crossed over? I'm like in my head about this. I'm like, did she see a ghost? Was Patrick Swayze there? Like, I didn't know what was happening, and I still have no idea, but something struck her that was like, I got to hide from this. And, she used to be like that with certain shows. Like if Katie, my younger daughter, wanted to watch Peppa Pig, oh, forget about it. Like she could be 2 rooms over with doors shut and would be like freaking out about it. Recently, she has on the bus, she's been complaining in the morning, asking me to drive her to school. And I'm like, what's going on? And thankfully, my younger daughter's on the bus with her, and she's neurotypical, but she's like, they're like the perfect Anna and Elsa couple, because she just gets her sister. She knows what makes her tick, and she understands it. So she's like, oh, Daddy, there's a baby on the bus now. I guess the bus driver had a child, and they're allowing her to, like, buckle up with the shortage and stuff. They're like, well, if you're willing to do it, we're willing to have you. And so I guess there's a baby on there, and the noise is bothering Elysia, so now she wears her headphones, And a lot of times places have what they call sensory kits. I don't know if you know this, but most stadiums, Philadelphia does a beautiful job. I mean, the Link, and then Wells Fargo and Citizens Bank all have something. Like Wells Fargo has a room, the Link has a room, but Citizens Bank has a trailer. It's like they set it up and you can kind of go in. It's through an organization called Culture City, who I think team up with cities, organizations, and they provide. Now, if they can do a internal space like the Link and Wells Fargo, they do. And if they can't, they have these mobile trailers that they can put out, and it's just kind of a little black box with a bunch of cool lights and squishy fidgets and beanbag chairs and Legos and fidget spinners and, all the things. And so that's kind of cool sometimes, because if we're somewhere she can't deal, then we need to have somewhere for her to decompress for a minute, because it's really like stimulus overload for her. Think about a time when you've been in like the worst anxiety and you're like, I got to get out of this room. It's just too much. Maybe it's the noise, whatever. And that can happen for her in almost any scenario. So it's really special when places put together. So if you ever see a place that says they have a sensory room, just know that for the parents who need it, it's a godsend, because otherwise we couldn't go to those events. Imagine spending hundreds of dollars on a football ticket. You want to have your kid experience it, and then all of a sudden they can't deal for a little bit. Well, you don't have to just bail. If you can go and just miss half a quarter and let them play with the fidget spinner, then they get like a little backpack to go back to the seats, and it has some of the things that you saw them play with. You can now put in the bag and take it back to the seat, and you get to watch the game. They get to be there, and they're regulating themselves. So even though it may look like they're playing on a device, they're still taking it all in. I mean, she's like Neo in the Matrix. Like the zeros and ones are flying around, but it allows her to regulate herself so that she can be calm and, continue to be in that space with everybody else. So I think those things, godsend. Love it. But yeah, those are some of the interests. When she was growing up, though, it was just the process for me was very different. Like now I'm like super accepting. I'm advocate. I love going to speak about her. I've gone to churches and talked a little bit about autism. If, people in their congregation have someone with autism and they're trying to help them understand the perspective. I think that's super important that we're raising awareness. Depending on when you're watching this episode, Thursday, April 3rd, I'm doing an autism awareness comedy show at Soul Joel's in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Would love to have you, 7 p.m., souljoels.com for the tickets. But yeah, and I'm, and that's a cool thing. I love doing those because actually I'm up in Waverly, New York on the 11th doing another one at the Legacy Lounge. So it's really neat that, we can infuse humor to sort of educate. I did a retirement home on Wednesday, and it was a show where they're like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if we had a clown tell jokes in the middle of the show? And so I was the clown. And I went in there and, it's got to be super clean, which is fine. And so I talk a lot about my daughter for the second half of the 20 minutes I was there. And I had a woman come up to me after, and she's like, thank you so much. I didn't know all of that. It was so informative, which as a comedian, if someone comes up and says, oh my goodness, your set was so informative, Just tugs at our heartstrings. Laughter? No. Tell me it's informative. I love a good TED Talk. No, but anyways, it was very sweet of her to do that. And I was happy to do that because I think when I tell the stories about my daughter, I hope that it does bring some awareness too, because listen, I knew nothing, right? They're talking about stuff like high functioning autism. That sounded like a feature on my AC unit, not a description for a human being. So I didn't know anything. And I had students who had Asperger's or some form of autism. And I always remember I had a hard time with them because I like to use analogies. And they're sometimes very literal thinkers. So they're like a Google image search and they're not quite putting together some of the nuances. I joke about this with like my daughter. If I'm like, oh, you can do whatever floats your boat. And she's like, why am I going to do Archimedes' principle? And just sort of some of these things that I never would have considered would have gone through her brain because I'm just used to using analogies. So I knew that sort of aspect for some kids can be, but autism is a huge spectrum. We talk about, I think some people see it as a line and you're like, oh, you fall on a certain part of the line. But there's actually better graphics out there if you follow some of the organizations that put out things about autism and neurodivergence. They do it sometimes like a pie chart. And it's sort of like, I've always described it a little bit too, like when if you've ever played a video game and you create a character. Sort of the attributes that you attend, certain attributes are at certain levels, maybe eye contact is really low, could be really high for some people on the spectrum, but it's just like when you're setting a player and you can only I used to play like Tiger Woods golf, and you wanted to make a golfer. Well, you couldn't make them 100% in everything. You had to redistribute those credits in different parts. And so that's just what happened. Some of the things within their vestibular system and their, neurologically speaking, some of those things were set differently. That's all. So when we go into the same room, we experience it very differently, right? The smallest sound for you or I could be a huge burden. And I didn't realize this. I was in Denver. I was traveling with the board teachers tour and in and out of a lot of airports. But this one airport had a tram service to get you to like the next terminal. And we get on there and this young couple comes on with a young daughter that was about my daughter's age. So I'm like tuned in because I'm missing my family at this point. And they get on and the door is shut. And then there's that like sound where it's like starting to propel from the station. And it's like this small little sound. But the girl covers her ears and starts screaming about how the sound and how painful it is and how loud it is. And she's just screaming. And we're like, I could barely hear it because of the decibel. But man, did my heart feel that for her because it made me realize, oh, okay, it's not just my daughter. This is a thing. And I didn't get that for a long time, right? Because we weren't around other kids who had autism. So if we were out at family functions as we were realizing what was going on with Elysia, we just didn't realize it. The most vivid one for me was I coached baseball for a long time and was really close with the group of guys that I coached with. And we had a party for, holiday season. And so we all were having kids around the same time. So my buddy Chuck, who hosted, had a daughter the same age. And so we all go to the party, bring our kids, bring our wives. And they had like a big room with a bunch of play stuff in the corners. And like Elysia just went off to the corner by herself and was like reading a book or, in her own world, doing her thing. And Madison, his daughter, was kind of going around, coming in and talking to some of the adults. At one point, I saw her sneak in and grab a cookie off the table, all deceptively. And I kept the secret. I didn't let them know. But I had a moment when we left there thinking like, why wasn't my daughter coming in and trying to talk to us? Why wasn't she trying to steal a cookie? She was just in the corner playing with the playset or doing whatever she was doing. And at that point, I was just so sad that I wasn't seeing what I thought a normal parent should see, that I just remember breaking down in the car to Amanda on the way home, just being like, what did we do? Why? The whole, very sad, very emotional. And now I think back to that moment and I think about where she is now and all the growth we've seen. I'm just like, but there are always going to be challenges, but there are far more fun things. Like now when Elysia ordered that, like those movies on Comcast and it was like $150, I was like, and I had to spend all this time on the phone with Comcast. I'm like, but now I see this text about ordering a God costume and I'm like, that's hysterical. And we're going to find a way to turn that into a joke because I think that's what's great about comedy, right? They say comedy is tragedy plus time. Yeah, so sometimes you got to process things. Mike Birbiglia, who's like, in terms of comedy, a guy that I look up to, he talks a lot about journaling, just journaling as a human. And then, because you got to process, you got to feel those feelings, you got to, know what to do with them. And then later on, you can then put them in your joke journal and, maybe turn that into a joke. And I do enjoy that. But there were just tough moments. Like, I think about another tough moment in kindergarten. And this was like I want to say right before the pandemic. She was in kindergarten, and the teacher and her, they just weren't vibing. Like, the woman did a lot of transition stations, and Elysia struggles with moving to non-preferred activities and struggles because she'll get so tuned into doing something, and then all of a sudden she's not hearing the cues that we're naturally transitioning to something else, and it's like you just kidnapped her, so she's like freaking out. So they were just butting heads, and we were kind of going through email, and I just felt like we were passive aggressive in the email. I don't know if you're a parent and you've ever had to email your teacher, your kid's teacher, but I think you get a level where there might be some misunderstandings. It's just a lot gets lost in text. I mean, I think text is one of the worst ways to communicate because you're really losing like 80% of how you receive a message from someone without gestures, without voice, without tone. You can't really tell if it's sarcasm, if it's snarky. You can assume, but we talked about this in episode 1. If you're following those 4 agreements, can't take anything personally, can't make any assumptions. And that's what happened. So I said, let's just call a meeting. I work in the district. I'm just down the street. Let's get together. And so we got together. I sat in those absurdly small chairs at my size. And, we were talking, and at first it had the tension. We were bringing the tension of those emails together. And at one point, she says to me, this isn't my first rodeo. And I said, yeah, well, it's mine. So I'm like, this is my first time with all of this. And here's what we're doing with Elysia. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. And here's why we feel the way we feel. I said, we take her to all these places. We take her to all these family functions. We test the limits we deal with the stresses of those things. So we want her to be as integrated into society as possible. We don't want to do, what they used to do in the day where you just combined you in and sent you to a home. People are like, oh, why wasn't autism around? Because those people were sending them away to a home where they were not going out of their houses. So you didn't see them. It wasn't that they didn't exist. And there was not testing for it back then. Let's be honest, like the test for it. And then the first test that they had for autism were biased towards boys anyways. So you were only looking for the things that boys would do versus girls. And those can be very different things. But that's a whole different episode. But in any event, so we're having this back and forth. I'm explaining and kind of just trying to be transparent. When I'm in a dialogue where I'm talking with someone and the situation's getting like serious, I just try to be very transparent, and I do the golden rule. I open up to the level I want them to open up. And so I just pour my heart out about Elysia and what we're hoping and what we're seeing and what we're trying to accomplish. And, we were still struggling with potty training, and she's in kindergarten at this point. Like, at that point, we were living our life in 15-minute increments. We were taking a potty in the SUV to stop on the side of the road on hour trips because we had to follow the plan. And so this woman looks at me and she's like, I have a son who's autistic, and I never took him out anywhere. And then she just stopped for a second, and she's like, I've never said that out loud to anybody before. And it was like I felt like that was the moment. And like every time I tell that story, like I get hit with that moment because there was a moment there where it was like, oh my goodness, like we just had a moment. She just had a moment. And I felt like after that, everything kind of worked the way it should. But I noticed that with teachers she had. We had her in a normal daycare before she went into kindergarten. And it turns out the teacher she had an autistic granddaughter who she was raising because her daughter was not able, for whatever reason, to take care of her. So the grandma does, which is not an uncommon scenario. And apparently she always treated her granddaughter with the tough love and sort of the old school mentality of like, we're going to smack the TV till it focuses. Now, I'm not saying she hit the girl. Let me rephrase that. But just the concept of, tough love and, this world's not going to change for you, so you need to change into it. And I appreciate that, and I respect the angles of that. And that's why we always wanted her in around different people because we want to see how she reacts. I think it's good practice for her. It can desensitize to the way the world's going to treat her. We don't want her to be in a bubble. But I've noticed that the people that were hardest on her, she had the hardest time with, were often people who had people with autism in their lives. But because autism is such a large spectrum, that sometimes what applied for one kid on the spectrum can't apply for the other kid on the spectrum. And that's where it gets really foggy. And I think that's why so many people have so many trouble. Because if you know one person with autism, they say you only know one person with autism. And that can be challenging, and you have to learn what makes her tick. And that's what I love about Elysia's name, because obviously we named her before she was born. And her name is Elysia, Elysia. And it actually stemmed from, I teach Latin. I'm a nerd. But, when we were reading Virgil, who wrote the Aeneid, he did it as a tribute to Homer, and who was a Greek poet. And basically, he created a story where his character, Aeneas, goes into the underworld while he's still alive, and he visits the different parts of the underworld as a way to explain what the underworld looked like in terms of mythology at that time. And the underworld was just where you went, but then there were different destinations within the underworld depending on how you lived your life. And so the one place that everybody would aspire to go to, like the great Greek heroes like Achilles and things like that, they were said to go to the Elysian fields, or Elysium. And so that's where her name stems from. It's basically the underworld's version of heaven, where the blessed and virtuous go. And so I was like, she had such a unique name that I'm like, well, and people are going to have to, we say Lisa, Elysia, you could modify it. But I think if people are going to respect and learn her name, then that's a good first indicator that would they be able to respect her and her differences and nuances. And I think that's sort of poetic that her name is like that, because she's just, if you don't get to know her, right? Just like any book, if you don't get to know Homer or the Iliad, you just like, oh, that's some boring book we had to read in middle school, and people just dismiss things like that. You're doing yourself a great disservice if you don't find out what all the hype is about. And so people with Elysia, like the people who are in her life that know her and really know her, love her and think she's amazing. And I could see how people who just meet her, like, she does regular Girl Scouts. And so we go on these trips. Like today, after this, I'm going to the Da Vinci Institute. They're having like a day to earn a badge and all that. But, I see, and not to blame the girls, but I get it. Like if you're a neurotypical girl and you're a fifth grader or whatever, Elysia could be a hard pill to swallow and be around. And you can tell because when we go on these trips, it's basically me and Elysia and everybody else. And that's fine because Elysia doesn't notice. She's tuned in looking at the exhibits and stuff. But it's just hard, I think, for some kids to understand how to interact with her. And it really shows when somebody does make an attempt, or we get a note from home that somebody asked Elysia to sit with them at lunch. Like, what a beautiful thing. I'm totally for quality over quantity on that. So those people are going to show their true colors, and they're gonna either adapt or not. And that's really the world we live in. My biggest concern is I want Elysia to find like her potential. I want her to, whether she has to live with us or whether she'll be able to be independent, I think it's still too young to tell. And either way, I'm cool. I think she's great. She can order all the God costumes to my house she wants as long as it's her credit card and she's got a job. But I think it's just going to be an interesting story to see how that develops. And I just see so much potential in her, and it's just so beautiful because there were, like I said, there were dark times. I mean, during COVID, she was sort of nonverbal. She really wasn't talking much. And she didn't understand why we couldn't just go outside, or why we couldn't go places that we normally were going all of a sudden, because we used to do so many activities. Swimming. I mean, we have her in everything. Cheer, soccer, baseball. We couldn't go to these things. And then me and Amanda are working our own jobs as teachers, Zooming all day. I'm helping teachers too. I'm working for Villanova at night. And if you weren't watching her, she started escaping the house. She'd just start going out the door. And I had a woman like honk her horn in our driveway because it was COVID. Nobody was like going up to people. And she's like, hey, is that your daughter, a blonde girl? I just saw her walk in the neighborhood. So I couldn't take her on a walk like I normally do every day. So she went on her own, and then I guess came back on her own. And we had no idea because we were both on the computer teaching. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, like how scary was that? Because, you know, we don't live in a residential area. It's like sort of back road. So thankfully she's like, her brain is like a Google Maps. I mean, she had a school bus driver that was training a new school bus driver, and the new driver took a wrong turn. And Elysia at like 4 years old lost her mind. That's not the right way. Like, you know, just, I mean, she couldn't talk yet, but she was like up in arms because they made a different turn. And so like, I was great sense of direction, but like how scary was that? So we had to like, and we were worried about at night, she would like open her window and like crawl out the window because it was like ground level. So we had to like debate, like, do we lock windows? Like, do we have to debate over, is it more likely for her to get out of a window or have to escape from a fire? Like, imagine making that decision in the middle of COVID with everything else going on. And so then we decided that we had to like, you know, put a thing there that she couldn't easily get out. And then we had to chain doors. We got sensors put on them so that if she did lift it, an alarm would go off on our like Alexas. I mean, and we would stay up at night until that system got in place. Thankfully, my mom was living with us. The three of us took shifts figuring out who was going to sort of stay up or stay nearby to listen in case she got out. And it's just like we were like a shell of a person because everybody just, no REM sleep was had in our house, you know, and then we put those chains at the top so she couldn't reach them, or because we have hardwood floors, we would hear her if she was dragging a chair. She's a problem solver. She's going to get through whatever obstacle you put. She's going to figure it out. So at least we could hear the chair being dragged across the kitchen because she wasn't sneaky. She doesn't know how to be deceptive or stealthy. She's just like, I want to get out. I'm going to get out. It's not her trying to be like, ooh, my parents are watching me. She just was doing it. So God love her, but that was very helpful for us. But I just thought about that. And then 2 days ago, I'm like going to sit down and she had to get pajamas out of the mudroom where we have our laundry room. And I had already locked the door for the night. And I just sat down. I was exhausted. I was icing my leg from a workout. And I see her having to go in there. And she just jumps up like Joel Embiid and like slaps the chain away. And I'm just like, that chain saved our life 5 years ago. And now here she is just slapping it away. But I got to tell you, I was happy because I did not want to get up out of that chair. But as I saw her do that, it just made me think about, wow, like that time when we put that chain, I remember installing that chain lock thinking, I hope this works. Like I cannot, and we didn't know what to do. And we're like, oh God, what if she couldn't get out, So it's just one of those things that you never know. You just hope for the best. You put your best foot forward. You hope for the future, and you put the work in every day to keep your family safe and keep them growing. And you don't be afraid to push the limits because you might inconvenience someone around you, So if you're out there and you know someone who's neurodivergent, try to learn who they are and who their heart is, because there's such a beautiful thing. The people who take the time to read the book that is Elysia enjoy the book that is Elysia. And the family or friends that we have that just know we have an autistic daughter don't get a chance to know her heart, and that's their loss, And I think it's not intentional. I think it's just people don't know what to expect, or and we fear what we don't know, right? But now I think we're living in a world where we're normalizing things, and that's beautiful. So if you're around on the 3rd of April, Thursday, 7 o'clock, you got to come to Soul Joel's, see the Autism Awareness Show. It's not just myself. It's other comedians who have some relationship with autism. And then if you're up in Waverly, New York, Binghamton area, upstate Pennsylvania, April 11th, Friday, I'm doing a show at the Legacy Lounge in Waverly, New York. Would love to have you there. And if you want me to come by and do an autism show, hit me up. I would love to bring, whether it's a keynote speech or whether it's comedy, just bring something to your organization. So thanks for listening. Thanks for taking this walk with me. I'll see you next week.